Trazyn the Infinite has stolen entire cities. He has stolen the last survivors of dead species and stood them, frozen mid-scream, in glass cases in his vaults beneath Solemnace. He has stolen the bones of saints, the weapons of Primarchs, and on more than one occasion he has stolen something so precious that he left a perfect copy in its place so that no one would ever notice it was gone. That is his signature. That is what he does. He does not smash and grab. He substitutes. Now look at the single most important object in the Imperium of Man, the Golden Throne, a relic so ancient that the Mechanicus cannot repair it, so sacred that 1,000 psykers a day are burned to keep it running, so central that the entire human religion is built on top of it. It is the most valuable artifact in the galaxy.
And there is exactly one being in that galaxy who collects the most valuable artifacts in existence, who can move through Imperial security like it isn't there, and who is famous for leaving flawless forgeries behind. So ask the question the Ecclesiarchy will never ask. What if the throne on Terra is the copy? What if Trazyn already has the original? Let me say at the front what this is and what it isn't. There is no codex page, no black library novel, no line of canon anywhere that says Trazyn the Infinite swapped the Golden Throne. Games Workshop has never written that scene, so this is not a fact. This is a case. And a case has 3 parts: motive, means, and opportunity. By the time we're done, you'll have all 3 sitting in front of you, and you'll have to decide for yourself whether the holiest object in human history is the genuine article or a very, very good fake with a little brass label somewhere out at the edge of the galaxy. That's the trial. Let's open it.
Start with who Trazyn is, because the whole argument lives or dies on his method. His name is pronounced Trazyn, and yes, the channel has heard the correction, so we're saying it clearly up front. His home is Solemnace, the tomb world, and the device he uses most often is the Tesseract Labyrinth, a pocket dimension cage that can hold anything from a man to a war machine. Pin those 3 words now because we'll come back to all of them. Trazyn calls himself the Archaeavist of Solemnace. He is a Necron overlord of the Nihilak dynasty, and he is, functionally, a museum curator who happens to be 60 million years old and effectively immortal. That number is not an exaggeration. The war in heaven, the conflict that produced his kind, was fought roughly 60 million years before the 41st millennium. During that war, the Necron tier underwent biotransference, stripped of flesh and soul and poured into bodies of living metal called necrodermis.
Most of them lost everything that made them a person in the process. Trazyn is one of the rare ones who kept a personality, who kept a self, and the self he kept is the obsessive. He had to be forced to undergo biotransference, and what survived the transfer was a collector who has spent the entire history of the galaxy acquiring its rarest things. Understand what that does to a mind. Every other being in this story has a clock running. A space marine lives for 1,000 years and thinks himself ancient. A human inquisitor counts decades. Even a Primarch, for all his power, was born into the timeline and can be ended within it. Trazyn was old before the human species existed. He watched with detached interest the unification wars that forged the Imperium. He watched the Great Crusade. He watched the Horus Heresy as a spectator, the way you might watch a documentary about a civilization you have no stake in.
To a being like that, the entire span of human history, every empire, every war, every god humanity has ever invented, is a single, recent exhibit, freshly acquired, still being cataloged. That perspective matters enormously to the case we're building, because everything about how Trazyn operates flows from it. He is never in a hurry. He never has to be. Here is the part the Imperium would rather you not dwell on. Games Workshop's own lore states that the surviving records of the war in heaven exist in only two places: the Eldari Black Library and the hidden museum of the Necron Cryptek, Trazyn the Infinite. Sit with that. Some of the oldest history in existence, older than humanity, older than the Emperor, older than the warp storms, survives in his vault. That is not a small-time thief. That is the single greatest archive of physical history that the galaxy has ever produced, and it belongs to one being who answers to no one. And how does he build that archive? Not by smashing,
By taking. The Black Library's own description of him calls his gallery a place full of the most dangerous artifacts and people of the galactic past. People. He doesn't just collect objects. He collects the moments and the beings inside them, frozen, catalogued, displayed. He captured Castellan Ursarkar Creed in the final seconds of the fall of Cadia, plucked him out of the battle and into a tesseract labyrinth, and added the hero of Cadia to a shelf. He holds a perfect genetic clone of the Primarch Fulgrim. He has the preserved head of Sebastian Thor. He has the trapped essence of an entire Necron overlord, Imhotep, sealed screaming in a crystal. This is a collector who already owns Primarch-grade specimens and the last members of extinct species. And his ambition has reached toward the Imperium's holiest relics before, openly, repeatedly, and on the record. Twice he went after the Spear of Vulcan, one of the sacred lost artifacts of the Salamander's Primarch. Once in the year 878 of the 41st millennium, and again during the Tok'ran Crusade in 943. Both times he was driven off in personal combat by Vulcan Heastan, the Forge Father, the keeper of those relics. Now, the obvious reading of that is that Trazyn failed, and he did, in the open, in a straight contest of arms. But pay attention to what it proves about his appetite. The greatest collector in the galaxy looked at the holy relics of a Primarch and decided they belonged in his gallery. He didn't consider them too sacred to take. He considered them overdue. If the Spear of Vulcan is worth 2 separate campaigns and 2 beatings at the hands of a Primarch's champion, then ask yourself honestly, what is the single most sacred object in the entire Imperium worth to him? Not a Primarch's weapon. The Primarch's father's throne, the oldest machine humanity ever built. So when you ask what such a being would want next, the answer almost writes itself.
But here's where it gets stranger. And here is the first place we have to be honest. The Hook said he leaves perfect copies behind so the theft goes unnoticed. That is the framing of this video, and it is the most in-character thing imaginable for him. But I want to be straight with you about the canon. What the lore documents firmly is that Trazyn acquires by deception, not by force. He sends out decoys of himself, surrogate bodies, so that his enemies cut down what they think is Trazyn and discover too late they struck a double. He can pour his consciousness into the nearest Necron and walk away wearing a new face. He moves through trickery and stealth and patience. The specific, polished idea that he always swaps a flawless replica for the original and strolls out undetected, that's the legend built on top of the documented behavior. It's the natural extrapolation of who he is. But it is extrapolation.
I'm flagging it now so that when I use it later, you know exactly what's load-bearing canon and what's the theory we're building. Motive, established. Method, a master of substitution and disguise by his own attested behavior. Now let's talk about the prize. Why the Golden Throne? Why would the greatest collector in the galaxy want that specific object more than anything else he could possibly take? Because of what the throne actually is.
Strip away the religion for a moment and look at the machine. Its core is a relic from the dark age of technology, humanity's lost golden era of science, and its exact origin is unknown even within the lore. The Emperor himself discovered the device buried deep beneath Terra and could not say for certain whether the idea behind it had been his or whether the thing he'd found had merely inspired him. The oldest, most advanced piece of human archaeotech in existence, and the most powerful psychic engine ever assembled, sitting in one chair.
Think about what that means to a curator who has spent 60 million years acquiring the rarest things history ever made. He has the bones of Primarchs. He has a clone of a Primarch. But the Golden Throne is older than all of it on the human side, stranger than all of it, and tied to the fate of a being the entire Imperium worships as a god. For Trazyn, this isn't just another acquisition. This is the centerpiece. This is the exhibit that the whole gallery is arranged around. A collector who experiences 10,000 years the way you experience an afternoon does not look at the most important object in human history and think, that one's too well guarded. He thinks, that one goes in the middle of the room. And the throne is irreplaceable in a way that makes it irresistible. There is exactly one. It cannot be rebuilt because no one alive knows how it was built.
The Mechanicus, the priesthood of the machine, the most technologically capable institution in the Imperium, cannot fully understand it and cannot repair its core systems. We'll spend real time on that fact in a moment because it's the keystone of the whole argument. But hold on to it as a value statement first. The single most precious quality in any collection is uniqueness. The Golden Throne is the most unique object the human species has ever produced. To the galaxy's greatest collector, that is not a chair. That is the crown jewel he didn't have yet. Now the keystone. The Mechanicus can't fix it, and the standard explanation is that they lost the knowledge during the Horus Heresy, when traitor tech priests took their secrets to the grave. But watch what that explanation actually admits. The lore is blunt about it. The tech priests maintain the Golden Throne, in the words of the lore, through ritual and rote rather than understanding. They can replace the components they recognize. They cannot repair the fundamental systems that are degrading. One explainer put it perfectly. They keep it running with a mix of sacred rites, blind faith, and hopeful button pressing, but the machine itself is slowly failing. And the few times they've actually tried to repair the deep mechanisms, the attempts ended in disaster, one of them nearly the death of the Emperor outright. So here is the question the Mechanicus refuses to ask itself. Why can't the most advanced minds in the Imperium understand the most important machine in the Imperium? The official answer is lost knowledge. But there is a second answer that fits every observed fact just as well, and it's the one the Ecclesiarchy will never write down. They can't understand it because it isn't human technology anymore. They can't service the core systems because those systems were never meant for human hands. A tech priest trained on 10,000 years of Imperial archaeotech opens up the throne, reaches the heart of it, and finds principles that don't match anything in any of his sacred texts, and concludes, of course, that the knowledge was lost. Because the alternative is unthinkable. The alternative is that the thing he's been praying to was engineered by something that isn't from Terra at all. The Codex is silent on this point, but the data isn't. Necron technology is, across the entire setting, the one technology that human science consistently cannot replicate or even comprehend. Stasis fields that freeze time, tesseract labyrinths that fold a man into a pocket of space. living metal that repairs itself.
If you wanted to build a working copy of a machine no human could service, a copy that would keep running for 10,000 years, that would pass every inspection because every inspection was already failing to understand the original, Necron engineering is precisely, exactly the tool for the job. The Mechanicus's helplessness isn't a bug in the official story. Reframe it, and it's the single best piece of evidence we have. A working object that the galaxy's master engineers cannot understand or repair is exactly what a Necron-grade replica would look like from the inside. And notice how the official explanation has to keep adding patches to stay standing. Why does the throne consume more psykers every century? Lost knowledge, they say. The maintenance is imperfect. Why did the deep repair attempts nearly end the Emperor? Lost knowledge again. They didn't understand what they were touching. Why can't Belisarius Cawl, the most brilliant Magos in 10,000 years, simply fix it? Lost knowledge plus politics. Every single anomaly gets explained by the same phrase, and the phrase is an admission dressed as an answer. We don't understand it is doing all the work in every one of those sentences. The lost knowledge story is not a different explanation from the replica theory. It is the replica theory, told by people who have ruled out the conclusion in advance. They have decided what the throne must be, humanity's holy machine, and then explained every piece of evidence that it isn't human as a gap in their own memory. That is not science. That is faith with a wrench in its hand. And faith, by definition, is exactly the inspection a forger prays for. Here is the cleanest way to put the whole keystone. There is exactly one technology in this galaxy that human hands cannot service and cannot copy, and it belongs to the Necrons. There is exactly one being who could place a working piece of that technology where the Imperium would never think to question it. And his name is Trazyn the Infinite. The number of canonical sources that explain the throne's unreparability without ever once considering this possibility is, frankly, all of them. And that silence, that refusal to even ask, is the most imperial thing in the setting. I want to slow down here and be fair to the other side because the strongest counter-argument lives right at this point, and a good case has to face it. The throne's history is, in fact, reasonably well documented on the human side. The Emperor found the core under Terra. He restored it and modified it himself, with hundreds of Mechanicum tech priests laboring around him to power his greatest secret project, the Imperial Webway, a road through the warp that would have freed humanity from the warp forever. When the Primarch Magnus shattered the Webway's protective wards with a single reckless act of sorcery, demons poured through the breach, and the Emperor was forced to sit upon the throne permanently to hold the rift shut. After he was mortally wounded at the end of the heresy, Rogel Dorn and the Mechanicum converted that same throne into the life support machine it is today. That's a continuous chain of custody, on Terra, in human hands, start to finish. There is no neat, documented window where the physical throne sat alone and unwatched. That is the honest counter, and I'm not going to pretend it away. Hold it in one hand. We'll come back to it. Because the other hand holds the question of opportunity. And opportunity is where Trazyn stops looking like a thief and starts looking like a force of nature. Remember who we're dealing with. This is a being for whom a chain of custody measured in 10,000 years is a single, quiet afternoon. The novel that defines him, Robert Rath's The Infinite and the Divine, spends its entire length showing exactly this. A Necron mind that experiences time on a scale no human can hold in their head, that plans across millennia, that is patient the way a mountain is patient. He doesn't need an unwatched moment in the human record. He operates beneath the human record entirely.
and consider his actual toolkit against that documented timeline. The throne was modified over centuries in the Imperial dungeon. It was nearly overrun by demons during the war within the webway, a battle so chaotic that the defenders eventually abandoned the tunnels entirely. It has been failing and bleeding power and consuming more and more psykers ever since, 1,000 a day in M41, rising to 4 times that to hold the same output as the centuries grind on.
Now picture a being who can freeze time in a localized field, who can fold himself and an object the size of a throne into a tesseract labyrinth, who can wear the face of anyone he chooses, working inside 10,000 years of that chaos. The siege of Terra itself, the breaking of the webway, the slow institutional rot of a priesthood maintaining a machine by rote. He doesn't need the door left open. He is the kind of being who experiences the locked door, the guards, the wards, and the 10 millennia of history as a single moment he can step sideways through. And here is the elegant part. The copy doesn't have to be a metaphysical marvel. It only has to keep working. It only has to keep the Emperor alive, keep the Astronomicon lit, keep consuming its 1,000 souls a day and performing the function. Necron engineering can build a machine that does exactly that and runs for 10,000 years untended. The replica wouldn't need to fool a god. It would only need to fool a priesthood that, by its own admission, already doesn't understand the thing it's praying to. We're not re-arguing whether Trazyn could move unseen. We're asking what he'd do once he was standing in front of the prize. And consider the cover that 10,000 years of catastrophe actually provided. When did the throne become vulnerable? Not in some quiet, well-documented century, but in the single most chaotic stretch of human history. The breaking of the webway, a demonic incursion erupting directly beneath the Imperial palace, in the very tunnels the throne was built to seal. The defenders, custodians, sisters of silence, fighting a losing battle in the dark and finally abandoning the webway entirely. Then, the siege of Terra itself, the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen, the sky on fire, the palace breached, an entire civilization's attention fixed on the war for survival.
And in the aftermath, a wounded god being craned onto a machine, that machine being torn apart and rebuilt by Rogel Dorn and the Mechanicum into something it was never designed to be. Custody, in that moment, was not a sealed vault and a careful inventory. Custody was chaos. Custody was 1,000 crises at once, and no one, anywhere, checking whether the chair was the same chair. A being who can stop time in a localized field and fold an object into a pocket dimension does not need the door unlocked. He needs everyone in the building looking the other way at the same moment. The history of the throne gave him 10,000 years of exactly that. There's a second layer to the opportunity too, and it's the one most people miss. Trazyn doesn't only move through space. The being who collects moments, who freezes the fall of Cadia in a box, operates on time the way you operate on a hallway. He doesn't have to be present at the right instant. For a mind that experiences millennia as an afternoon, the entire history of the throne, its discovery, its modification, its breaking, its rebuilding, is a single continuous scene he can walk the length of, choosing his moment from outside it. That is what it means to be a collector who is also, functionally, outside of time. The when of the swap is not a problem to be solved. The when is just another shelf. So what did he really take? This is where it gets darker, and this is where the audience itself sharpened the question. Under one of the most watched videos on this exact subject, Inquisitor Romanov's Emperor is Dead, with nearly 500,000 views, a viewer named Alejandro Molina 7270 left a note that stuck with the channel ever since. The observation was simple. Trazyn already made a display for both the throne and the Emperor. Both. Not just the chair.
Now I have to be careful here, because that's a viewer's observation, not a confirmed line of canon, and I won't pretend the lore states it outright. But follow the logic of the being we've spent 20 minutes describing. He doesn't collect chairs. He collects what's inside them. He collects the moment and the man. He has a Primarch clone. He has the hero of Cadia caught in the act of vanishing. He has saints' heads and a screaming overlord in a crystal. So if Trazyn took the throne, the disturbing implication isn't that the Imperium worships an empty fake. It's that the greatest specimen in the entire galaxy, the wounded god himself, the master of mankind, sustained and frozen at the exact moment of his eternal half-death, might be the centerpiece of the display. The throne would just be the frame. I want to be clear that this last step is inference, the furthest reach of the case, and the original comment doesn't say it and canon doesn't confirm it. But it's the natural end of the road. The collector who freezes the last survivor of a dead species mid-breath does not look at a dying god holding the galaxy together and think, leave it. He thinks, that is the finest thing I will ever own. Which brings us to the obvious objection, the one you've been holding since the start. Surely someone would know. Surely someone, somewhere, in 10,000 years would notice that the holiest object in human history had been replaced. And the answer is the whole point of a Trazyn substitution. The only way it works is if no one can tell. Walk through who could possibly tell. The Mechanicus can't. They don't understand the original, so they can't recognize a replica. That's the entire keystone we built. The Custodes guard the throne with their lives, but they are warriors and wardens, not engineers. They would notice an intruder, not a swapped mechanism that keeps performing flawlessly. The ordinary priesthood sees a glowing golden chair and a continuing astronomicon and concludes the god endures. That leaves the handful of beings who actually could tell the difference, and look at the list. The Necrons themselves, who have every reason to say nothing because it's their own kind's handiwork. The very highest, most secretive tier of the Mechanicus, Belisarius Cawl, who the lore says has hinted he might know how to repair or even replace the throne, but who is held back by what one source calls the political and religious implications. Imagine the implications of announcing that the holiest object in the Imperium isn't the original. And Robute Guilliman, the returned Primarch, the one mind in the Imperium clear-eyed enough to suspect, and politically trapped enough to know that saying it out loud would shatter the faith that holds 1 trillion souls together. Every single being capable of detecting the swap has a reason for silence. That's not a hold in the theory. That's the theory's most uncomfortable strength. And think about the shape of the silence itself. Because a good substitution doesn't just hide the evidence, it makes telling the truth impossible. Suppose Cawl knew. Suppose, deep in his 10,000-year stockpile of forbidden archaeotech, he had compared the throne's mechanisms against everything he understands, and concluded that the principles inside it are not human, and never were. What does he do with that? He cannot say it. The Imperium is a religion of 1 trillion worlds built on the literal, physical reality of the god Emperor on his golden seat. Tell that civilization the seat is a copy, and you don't get an investigation. You get a holy war, a schism, the Ecclesiarchy declaring you a heretic before the words have finished leaving your mouth. The truth, even if someone has it, is unspeakable. That is the genius of substituting the single object an entire faith is built around. The forger doesn't need to silence the witnesses. The witnesses silence themselves. Because the alternative is to detonate the thing they exist to protect. Trazyn,
the patient curator, would have understood that better than anyone. The best place to hide a stolen god is behind the certainty of the people who worship him. And this is the part where I keep my promise and put the honest counter back in your hand. Because a case you can't argue against is just a story. The strongest objection remains exactly what it was. The throne's human-side provenance is documented. The swap has never been written by Games Workshop, and the novel that establishes Trazyn's method never once points it at Terra. The case rests on motive, means, and opportunity, not on a confirmed scene. There is no smoking gun. There is a suspect with a flawless record of taking exactly this kind of thing, standing next to exactly this kind of crime, with no alibi the lore bothers to provide. In any court, that's not a conviction. It's an indictment.
I'm offering you the indictment, not the verdict. The verdict is yours,
which leaves the last beat, and it's the one that makes Trazyn Trazyn, the horror that's also somehow a joke. Because step back and look at what the theory actually describes. It describes 10,000 years of human civilization, a religion of 1 trillion worlds, crusades fought, heretics purged, 1,000 souls a day fed into the dark, an entire species organizing its every waking moment around one object. And that object, to its true owner, is just one more labeled exhibit. A placeholder did the real work. The genuine article sits in a climate-controlled gallery at the edge of the galaxy, behind glass, in a hall 42 square miles wide, with a little brass plaque beneath it. And the plaque doesn't say sacred, it doesn't say God. It says what every plaque in that gallery says. It records the date of acquisition and the name of the collector, and it moves on to the next exhibit.
The single most important object in human history,
reduced to a line in a catalog maintained by a bored immortal who already owns 300,000 things he finds more interesting. That's the punchline the Ecclesiarchy will never let itself hear. Not that the emperor is a fraud, not that the faith is a lie, something quieter and worse, that the most sacred thing in creation might already be a souvenir. And here is the final twist of the knife, the one that makes this a Trazyn story and not just a theft story. For the Imperium, the Golden Throne is the center of everything. The axis the whole species turns around, the object worth 1,000 lives a day, 10,000 years of war, the literal seat of God. For Trazyn, if the theory holds, it isn't even the most interesting thing on the shelf. It's one acquisition among hundreds of thousands. It shares a hall with a cloned Primarch and a screaming overlord in a crystal, and the captured last second of a dead world's hero.
The most important object in human history
would not even be the most important object in the room it's displayed in. That asymmetry, the gulf between what the throne means to the worshippers and what it means to the owner, is the entire horror and the entire joke compressed into one image. Everything humanity is, weighed against a curator's idle Tuesday. Recall how we started. We said Trazyn substitutes. He doesn't smash and grab. He leaves a copy so good no one ever notices. We built the whole case on that signature, and I told you the specific, flawless copy detail is the theory rather than the attested canon. But the spirit of it is the most documented thing about him. He acquires by deception. He hides what he takes. He is patient past the point of human comprehension. Now, apply that being to the one object every other faction in the galaxy considers untouchable, and the question stops being, would he, and becomes, why are we so sure he hasn't? The Imperium has never asked.
That's the tell. In 10,000 years of theology written around that chair, not one cardinal, not one magos, not one inquisitor has stood up and said, prove it's the original.
Prove the thing we're feeding 1,000 souls a day to maintain is the thing the Emperor actually sat on. The question is so unthinkable that asking it is itself a kind of heresy, which is exactly the security a collector like Trazyn would have engineered if he could. Trazyn the Infinite has spent 60 million years stealing the most precious things in the galaxy and leaving copies so good that no one ever notices they're gone. He has the bones of Primarchs. He has the last living members of extinct species, frozen mid-breath in glass. And the one object in this galaxy more valuable than all of it, the oldest machine ever built, the seat of a dying god, the thing the Mechanicus cannot even repair, is exactly the kind of prize a collector like that does not leave on the board.
The Imperium kneels before the golden throne and calls it the holiest object in creation. Somewhere at the edge of the galaxy, in a quiet vault, the real one sits behind glass with a little brass label. And the label does not say sacred, it says acquired.